So my name is Tanasia Buchanan, and the carbon offsetting project that I chose to talk about or review is the Renewable Power for Sustainable Development project, and it focuses on wind energy and wind turbine usage. So, renewable power for sustainable development. So the industry that this focused on, as I just stated, was wind energy and the usage of turbines. And then I have a picture of a turbine over here in the corner. The continent that this is on is Asia, the country being India, and the specific location is Tamil Nadu in India. The overall objective of this project was to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions by energy generation through renewable sources, and in this specific case, the source is wind. And the reason why this is considered a carbon offsetting project is because wind generation does not produce any carbon. It doesn't produce long-term negative environmental effects, such as hazardous waste disposal, water pollution, or air pollution. And then wind being a renewable source is why Renewable Power for Sustainable Development is the title of this project. So wind turbines in general are a device that converts kinetic energy of wind into electrical energy, and that electrical energy is used to power homes, businesses, workplaces, just any place in general surrounding or in the near vicinity of that wind farm or wind power plant, which are both, terms for the fields of wind turbines. So wind turbines generate renewable energy, which is why they're carbon offsetting, because renewable energy is something that we can use over and over and over again, and it will not be depleted, unlike non-renewable sources that I'm sure we know of. And then in this corner, I have a picture of a wind turbine or wind power plant on land. And then another example in the top is a wind turbine in the ocean. Oh, some positives of wind turbines is that it contributes to social well-being by empowering vulnerable communities and improving local employment opportunities and reduces migration to labor. It also contributes to economic well-being by creating new jobs, infrastructure development, and improves revenue for electricity sales. And then it contributes to environmental well-being by decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, by not emitting air pollutants as stated before, and also by not burning fossil fuels. And as I stated before, wind generation does not, produce any long-term negative effects. It doesn't produce greenhouse gases, at least in the actual production of wind, does not produce greenhouse gases. This project overall encourages renewable efficient technologies, because those renewable sources are going to be a lot better in the long run, as you will be able to use them over and over and over again and not deplete them, whereas non-renewable sources are obviously going to be depleted, and also the generation of those non-renewable sources are going to emit greenhouse gases. The burning of fossil fuels just in general will emit carbon, which is obviously not good. So some barriers of the project actually are an investment barrier, which is the largest barrier of this project, is technically or essentially not being financially supported enough to support the project, which would obviously lead to higher emissions. If you don't have a project that is carbon offsetting, then your emissions will, they could increase, but they will just not change at all. If you're not doing anything to, get rid of them or stop them. There's also a technological barrier in that you might not have the right technology to produce a project such as the one that I'm currently discussing. A prevailing practice barrier, you might be disrupting something that's already in place if you are wanting to, place these wind power plants. So, for example, if you're placing them in the ocean, you're obviously going to be disrupting that ecosystem or ecosystems that are in the ocean by coming in and placing something as big as a wind turbine in the ocean. And then same thing on land, you're going to be disrupting those ecosystems. A lot of times wind farms are built on existing farms, so in that case you'll have land already available for you, but in some cases you will be disrupting the ecosystems that are already there. Also, another barrier is that relying on wind for energy could sometimes present itself to be unreliable, as your wind is not going to be, a fluid system. It's not always going to be the same. It's going to fluctuate. It's going to change over time, depending on what the weather's like, how strong the wind is. But despite all of these barriers, it is a more carbon efficient source for electricity generation. So, some further issues to keep in mind when it comes to carbon offsetting projects. So, does manufacturing a project this large, or carbon offsetting projects in general, do manufacturing them go against cutting greenhouse gas emissions? And when I refer to manufacturing, I mean to manufacture all the parts of these wind turbines. They're huge, so you need to put a lot of work in to manufacture these. And obviously the manufacturing of these parts is known to emit tons of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in general into the atmosphere. And obviously a project that requires the manufacturing of so many wind turbines, these factories that are producing these are going to emit gases. So, does this go against the goal of the project overall? With this project, I think as long as the wind energy counteracts the greenhouse gases being emitted enough, then it will work. But overall, I do think that this is very important to mention, because lots of projects neglect transparency, and that the greenhouse gases being emitted by the factory work is not as mentioned, and I'll talk about this more in the next. So, as I stated in the last slide, greenwashing is the misleading claims about environmental benefits of carbon offsetting projects in general, and in this case, it's related to the wind energy projects. So, resource consumption and greenhouse gas emissions are something that are often not as talked about when it comes to carbon offsetting projects, which is why it's referred to as greenwashing, by hiding these negative effects of these projects. So resource consumption is obviously a drastic negative effect, because you're obviously consuming the resources of the land that you're using, while you're also consuming lots of resources to create these wind turbines. And then the greenhouse gas emissions that are being emitted through the creation of these wind turbines in these factories is a great factor. And then ethical implications is just that emitting all these gases to create these wind turbines, is it morally and ethically right to do so? Is it worth, the outcomes of the usage of the wind turbines? And then in here I have, when energy is typically morally justified to reduce carbon emissions. As I just said, is it morally right to, use so much energy and emit gases in order to eventually reduce the amount of energy that we're using and eventually cut back on the usage of greenhouse gases? Also, some of the ethical implications to keep in mind is that the production of these wind turbines can place burdens on communities, in that it when you're releasing these greenhouse gases into communities surrounding these wind power plants, you're obviously going to see negative effects on these communities through air pollution and water pollution, which we know are very negative effects. They can affect your health negatively. The main thing that comes to mind when it comes to air pollution and water pollution is respiratory issues. So, carbon offsetting projects in general um, have their negative aspects of them, and then have their positive aspects of them. Overall, I think that this carbon offsetting project presents itself with many pros, and I think the pros personally outweigh the cons, in my opinion. The pros being mitigating the emission of greenhouse gases through a better usage of energy, and the cons of the projects have essentially being emitting the greenhouse gases themselves. Though I think that the greenwashing of the project is negative, and emitting gas to create a project that mitigates emissions is a little counteractive. As long as the emissions prevented are greater than the emissions produced, then I think the project remains to be positive, in my mind at least. I think that with the state of the climate that we're currently battling, regarding climate change, it's good to continue to explore solutions to the ongoing battle and issues that we're seeing. So I think that any carbon offsetting project presents practical solutions to climate change, as long as the negative effects are not blatantly ignored, but instead acknowledged and addressed, and we're not facing greenwashing, and keeping communities in the dark when it comes to the negative effects of these projects that will in turn be positive. Within the specific project regarding wind turbines, I think an area for enhancement within this project would be to focus funding on ways to reduce emissions from manufacturing the products for the turbines, so that the work of the wind energy is not counteractive to the factory greenhouse gas emissions, and that we actually do see a change, and a positive change, and that this sounds bad to say, but that the greenhouse gas emissions that we're producing are worth the positive effects that we see from the wind energy that we're using. And then the source that I used for this entire presentation was just this one, and this is the Renewable Power for Sustainable Development carbon offsetting project source. It's where I got all the information for the project itself. And yeah, I hope you take something away from this presentation.